ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tom Swan. I'm a corporate partner at Shepherd & Wedderburn, focusing on the upstream energy sector. As you know, this session is going to be a discussion on future innovation and skills. Before we start that, I should say there's a few spaces left for the North Sea Talent Conundrum workshop that will start at 12:50, just immediately after this session. That's in room 7. Spaces are on a first-come, first-served basis, so if you fancy it, just go along to room 7 after this session. Just by way of introduction, so I guess from the birth of this industry in the 70s, the history of North Sea has been one of innovation and the development of skills required to work in deep water and an unforgiving environment. And as we heard in the last session, the challenge now is how to maintain our production in what is now a very mature basin as sustainably as possible while moving towards a net zero world. So to meet that challenge and to take advantage of the opportunities presented by the transition, I think it's going to be vitally important that the sector develops new technologies and ways of working and skills. And how we go about this is really the focus for the panel at the moment. So format of the session will be same as the last one. Each of the panelists will give a brief presentation, then we'll have a Q&A session, and then hopefully some audience Q&A as well. So I'd like to invite our first panelist, Jenny Stanning, who's the External Relations Director at OE UK, to kick us off.
Thank you, Tom. Multitasking, not one of my, there we go, strong suits. So I'm Jenny Stanning, I'm from Offshore Energies UK. We are the leading trade association for an integrated offshore energy industry, and we take in our members, 400 of them, right across the UK, active in oil and gas, wind, hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, taking in the operator community, the developer community, but also that world-class supply chain we've all heard talk about earlier this morning. So I'm going to build on some of the comments that Tom's given us to scene set a little bit more about that theme of innovation and skills in a future North Sea. But before I do that, I do think it's... Oh, that slide is missing. I was going to give a bit of a scene set to talk about where we are now and how great an industry we have now before we move into the future. Because the UK offshore energy sector is absolutely essential for the economic and environmental prosperity of our country. Our brilliant, skilled people work tirelessly to produce the energy from around the seas to power not just our homes, transport and industry, but also to make the everyday products we need to live well here. We also make a huge economic contribution. Oil and gas production alone added over £20 billion to the UK economy last year, and it supports over 200,000 good skilled jobs right across the UK. At the moment, it feels a little bit like we're in the middle of a political storm in a general election year. And there is a huge focus on oil and gas, our future transition plans, jobs and tax. And it was into this environment that this week we launched our OE UK manifesto, a plan that builds on the North Sea transition deal that we heard talked about earlier in the panel session, and a plan in which we set out the prize, a homegrown energy transition. But what does that actually mean? If you were paying attention to Mitch's speech earlier, he actually set this out for you. It means contributing to an energy transition which leaves no individual, community or sector behind. It means securing those 200,000 high-value jobs here in the UK while growing a skilled and diverse workforce for the future. It means delivering £200 billion worth of private investment over the next decade, spurring economic growth and fostering UK technology and innovation across the energy mix, and meeting around half of UK energy needs by 2030. And it means helping the UK make that statutory obligation to hit net zero by 2050 or 2045 here in Scotland, and decarbonising offshore energy production. Again, we heard a lot about that this morning. Now, we've got some specific asks of policymakers that I can go on to talk about around innovation and around technology and skills in our manifesto. But I do think it's important to recognise that we're not starting from zero here, because we've got a really proud history of innovation in oil and gas. Whether it's deploying people and technology to hostile or dangerous environments, driving simplification and standardization in the face of project-driven bespoke demands. Supply chain colleagues, you'll be very good at that. Or in fact, our industry's approach to HSE too. we have a really proud history, and these enabling capabilities that we've developed in North Sea oil and gas are directly transferable into the new energy sectors. So we're already in action in terms of supporting that innovation. At the heart of the North Sea transition deal, which, by the way, is about to celebrate turning 3 next month, is an ambition to sustain that long-term supply chain anchored here in the UK. The deal recognises that much of the technology and innovation that got us where we are today came from our world-class supply chain, innovating, creating, disrupting. Now, as part of the North Sea transition deal, working very closely with Robert Gordon's University and other industry stakeholders, we published a supply chain roadmap. That roadmap aims to support the supply chain to deliver net zero and also be part of an innovative future North Sea. There are 6 themes to the roadmap, but Tom, I'm not going to go through all 6 of them because there are only 2 that are relevant really to today's session. The first one picks up on a theme we heard about earlier this morning, and that's about delivering visibility and activity. Because for our supply chain to invest and build the capability and capacity we need, they need to see a sustainable pipeline of activity. That's one of the reasons that ongoing activity in oil and gas is so important, and a main reason that here at OEUK we will continue to champion that to all governments and every political party. But the second specific piece from that supply chain roadmap are specific actions to foster technology and innovation. For example, signposting some of the funding opportunities that are out there for technology, establishing support and funding mechanisms to develop, test and implement new UKCS technology and innovation, and to establish UK capacity and capability to deliver greater than 30% UK technology content, which is a target in that North Sea transition deal, agreed with government and the industry. We talk a lot about capability here in the UK, and to support a better picture of that, we've also taken on extensive capability mapping, including most recently the study that Pauline was talking about earlier from Rystad, that will help inform revision of those local content. If I move on to our manifesto, there are 4 pillars to that manifesto, and hopefully you can see innovation, technology and skills as a core part of that plan. In the section on technology and innovation, we reinforce the need for funding for research and development, because our experience of developing the North Sea shows the benefit of prioritising UK-led R&D. We think that a little bit of public R&D spend can then crowd in public sector capital and support R&D activity right across the whole of the UK. A little really does go a long way. We also want to protect the specialist hubs in R&D with energy expertise, like the Net Zero Technology Centre, the Ore Catapult and the Net Zero Industry Innovation Centre. We think those organisations should continue to be supported by our policymakers. You can also see that skills are a real theme for us through here. Our manifesto looks to protect those high-value jobs in the UK, but grow a skilled and diverse workforce for the future. The good news is the people in our energy workforce are amongst the most highly skilled and best equipped in the world. The great news is, according to those clever people at RGU, almost 90% of the oil and gas workforce has medium to high transferability. Now, activity to support our people to transition is well underway. The North Sea Transition Deal has a real focus on supporting that transition and ensuring that we improve diversity, and hopefully we'll get some good questions about that in the panel. We're mapping career pathways, so people inside the industry already, and those people who are thinking about joining, can see how a career in oil and gas can transition to a career in another sector like carbon capture and storage. We're also supporting the development of a skills passport so that people can move seamlessly between sectors, and I'm sure that Michael from Opito will touch on that more later. Because it's work like this that helps retain the vital skills that we need for the future. But what does that workforce even look like? That will largely come down to the shape of our industry and how successful our transition is. Again, if I go back to RGU, their Powering Up the Workforce report said we could see vast differences in the size of the workforce that we might imagine, depending on how well we transition. So the pressure is on to get that transition right now, so the opportunity is there for those people and those jobs. Our manifesto has some specific policies to support the maintenance and development of a skilled workforce. The Energy Skills Passport has to survive a general election as a central vehicle for transition, underpinning one workforce to serve the whole of the offshore energy industry. We'd like to see a single skills body in each nation to help collaboration between devolved governments, national government, employees, education providers and sectors on strategic skills requirements. We also want to see flexible pathways to employment, including apprenticeships and higher education. And those higher education institutions need to be supported so they can continue delivering courses in geoscience, engineering and environmental science. We also think that apprenticeship levy should be reformed so it's a bit more flexible. And we want to see how high standards of workforce HSE honed in the oil and gas sector championed in the new energy industries. Finally, we want to engage our existing and future workforce and our trade unions and give them agency over their transition by creating long-term skills demand forecasts which support career and job planning. It's quite a wish list. It's quite a challenge we've got coming up too. So before I hand over to our next speaker for a bit more of a granular look at skills and innovation, I've got one last reflection to leave with you. In my day job, I spend an awful lot of time trying to convince politicians from all parties to support and champion this sector, or arguing, as my kids put it. It can be really hard to get agreement over an approach that supports investment and focus on the North Sea, particularly if you're talking about contentious subjects like windfall taxes or ongoing licensing for oil and gas. But some of the best conversations that I have with stakeholders come when I talk about innovation, technology, and the brilliant people that underpin this industry and this industrial success story. Then you get real consensus around a desire to protect jobs, promote tech and innovation, even if sometimes the detail that comes out doesn't actually deliver that. So my challenge to stakeholders, and perhaps something for us all to think about, is how can we harness that consensus that innovation in our people should be championed, get the policies and the details right, and deliver a homegrown energy transition that benefits us all. Looking forward to your reflections and hopefully some good questions later. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. That was a really good and interesting overview of what OE UK are doing. So our next speaker is Dr. Christopher Banks. He's the Principal New Energy and Geoscience Consultant at SLB, and he's going to talk a bit about technology innovation.
How do you do? I want to start off today by saying that the North Sea industry that I know was founded on the pioneering spirit of exploration. And as we move into transitions, it's that pioneering spirit of exploration that's really going to carry us forward. And so we need to get that enthusiasm to embrace the opportunity that's ahead of us. Now, energy transitions are really not new. When I started school in the 1980s, I used to play at being a striking miner. And little did I know that I was part of an energy transition at the time. And then when I think about the transitions that I've seen, from the ramping down of coal, the dash for gas, with the unbundling and privatization of the energy sector in the 90s, and what we're seeing recently, there's really three unifying elements that drive an energy transition. The first is policy. And right now we have a clear imperative on policy for decarbonisation. The second is economic opportunity, or lack thereof. As production declines, we can begin to question perhaps the economic opportunity, although there's still a large opportunity there of oil and gas. But we can also embrace the new opportunities of the energy to come. And the last lever, the most important lever for me personally in my day-to-day job, is technology. And this energy transition that we're currently seeing happens at exactly the same time that Industry 4.0 and digitalization is happening. So there is a huge opportunity for technological innovation with the energy transition that we're seeing. Of course, we need to ramp up the scale and we need to ramp up the speed. So 45.5 gigawatts, my last research found, of offshore wind that we are beginning to get on the books. We've got about 10 gigawatts at the moment. ScotWind announced 30. About 2/3 of that are floating. So floaters are really a game changer, if you like, for opening up more resource. But simply put, 45.5 gigawatts cannot be absorbed by the domestic grid. So we have to do something with it if we're not going to curtail and put the brakes on wind turbines because the grid can't take them due to network congestion. And we're going to have to do things with the excess energy when demand does not require it. And that obviously tempting thing is to then to go down the hydrogen route. And we've done some modelling recently with the Net Zero Technology Centre that shows that Scotland can be a major exporter of clean hydrogen right into the industrial heartland of Germany to help decarbonise Europe. And Germany are making very strong signals that they are a market for that hydrogen gas. So with 10 gigawatts of current installed capacity and a lot more to come, the offshore wind sector is a really burgeoning place for our transition. But it provides us with a challenge because the fundamental attributes of energy systems are changing and we have to change with them. And what it all sums up to is added complexity. Obviously, we want to go from carbon-based to a decarbonised energy system. We all want that, but we have to be realistic that it's a transition. At the moment, we're 78% fossil. That's going to take some time. But we also go from a centralised to a distributed energy system. At the moment, we have large-scale point-source oil production facilities, refineries, what have you. We also have large utility-scale thermal power plants that take their product via a distribution network to consumers. Because renewables are lower energy density, it means that the production also has to be distributed. And so we're going from a, if you like, few to many to many relationship, which needs us to really up our distribution network game and to think about how we handle energy differently. Now, of course, we're also dealing with going from unidirectional flows from upstream to downstream consumer to bidirectional flows. Anyone with a roof space at the moment can become a producer and a consumer, what we call a prosumer. Sometimes you put into the grid, sometimes you take out of the grid. Any storage on the grid also is two-way flows. You put energy into the storage, you take energy out of the storage. And so we end up with prosumers, constorers, and pro-constorers, and it all ends up a little bit silly. But what it does mean is that we need bidirectional flows on transmission networks that are effectively designed for unidirectional flow. We also need to go from a controllable energy system, because as long as you've got the fuel, oil and gas is controllable, to one that reacts to the slews and the lulls, if you like, in the production of renewable energy. We also need to do things like, we're used to going from taking fuel, burning it, producing electrons. We also need to have a mindset now where we also go from electrons to producing fuel. So we can produce chemical energy vectors from electrons, and perhaps that is one thing that prevents us to curtailing the wind when we have excess wind, to produce those chemical energy vectors to put it down the pipeline into the heart of industrial Germany. Also, we have an evolved system that's grown over time. We now need to go to a planned system where we actually begin to think about how things all work together holistically, because we need to think about our networks, our distribution networks, the size of cables that we need, really going towards a more complicated distribution and transmission system. So it all sums up to complexity, and there's only one thing that we could really use to control that complexity if we aren't going to end up with chaos. And that is the digitalization of energy systems. And that means everywhere that there's production or consumption, we need to measure, and every node in the system needs to be aware of what's going into the system and going out of the system. From those distributed measurements, we need to be able to communicate that to processing, where we have the insights from data analytics, machine learning, artificial intelligence, to make real-time decisions on the grid, or on the transmission network, on the production facilities, on the asset, whatever it may be that we're trying to control. And those systems need to then be able to use the Internet of Things at the individual node to make decisions such as turn that down, turn that off, ramp that up, delay that demand, whatever it may be. So what I really wanted to say is that digital is the real enabler of the energy transition. The transition is happening, it's here. The fundamentals of the attributes of our energy system are changing, and it's really technology and specifically digitalization that will be the enabler to help us realize the economic opportunity that's out there. So to loop it back from where I started, I'm excited about the future of the North Sea. I know that sometimes we like to have a little bit of a grumble, and we work in perhaps social networks, especially in the city where we're all effectively from one industry, about having a little bit of a grumble. But it's exciting times, and as long as we can grasp that spirit of exploration that we started off with, the original North Sea Tigers started off with, then I think there's a really healthy place for us to be. So Aberdeen and the North Sea is a good place to call home.
Thanks, Chris. That was really interesting. Our next and penultimate speaker is Andy Norrie, who's Head of Sales and Business Development for Europe at Stats Group.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks to Energy Voice for having us here today. I kind of feel slight pressure being the sort of token representative of the supply chain and service companies, but I'll do my best to discuss who Stats are today, what we provide, a couple of examples from the energy transition, things we're working on as well. So as I said, Stats Group, who are we? So we're actually a bit of an Aberdeen success story. We stem from one guy with a rucksack full of test tools on a motorbike 25 years ago in an office about 5 minutes from here. We're now still based in Aberdeen, but have sort of 7 operational bases around the globe with about 400 staff in total. So obviously, in terms of the life cycle chain of oil and gas, predominantly our work at the moment is in the critical maintenance section. So the tools we provide, which I'll talk on, we specialize valve changeouts, valve repairs, enabling repair work and typically hydrocarbon systems at the moment. Increasingly, we're now also involved in decom. That's well underway as we know. So a few projects in supporting bypass and life extension and abandonment of platforms, etc. And then, as we're here to talk about today, we're also involved in energy transition in our own little way. You know, we provide quite a key part of a small part of what is obviously a huge challenge and a huge move for everyone over to support the transition, both from a hydrogen perspective and CO2 as well. So, I mean, as I say, typically I'm more used to doing technical presentations specifically on our tools rather than looking at it from a high level. So I'll promise not to talk too much about what we specifically do, but effectively what we get involved with, as I said previously, it's pipeline isolation equipment. They're all a nice yellow color, which suggests subsea. However, we do work onshore, topside, and obviously subsea as well. So that ranges from piggable isolation tools, line stopping tools, and clamps and connectors have kind of come out of that as well. So where do we fit in to the transition? Well, I think it's fair to say we don't fit in at the start. There's a lot of pre-commissioning and commissioning work that has to be done. But, looking to the future, you're not really going to be able to have this infrastructure of pipelines carrying CO2, hydrogen, if you have no safe way of repairing that infrastructure moving forward. So that's kind of where we sit currently in the hydrocarbon environment and where we will sit, hopefully, as we move through the energy transition. So, as I said, we'll speak a little bit about hydrogen and CO2 and what we're doing. So this is the sort of stats generic presentation on the hydrogen map, if you like, for Europe. It's probably already out of date, looking at the speed of where this is increasing. But the purpose of this really is just to highlight, the task at hand, the volume of projects that are being undertaken. As it says there, 21 countries committed to producing a pure hydrogen network by 2040. Through repurposing new pipelines and a series of other measures. So from a hydrogen perspective, as I said, first of all, so where do we fit in? So we're very fortunate to being part of the LTS Futures project. So that's we were contracted specifically by SGN for that project. So that's looking at how our tools can be transferred from the existing hydrocarbon utilization that they have into working with hydrogen and I'll show you CO2 in a minute, but specifically relating to hydrogen in this instance. So we've been working with SGN and others doing some testing, Spade Adam down in Cumbria. Early days of that testing, but generally pretty positive results for industry. And as I say, without doing this testing and having that funding in place to do some of that testing, then you're just not going to have the tools that you need when you require them in the future. So hydrogen, as I say, it's fair to say it's still at a testing phase. You know, as I say, working as part of LTS Futures, various other projects. We're also doing some stuff internally in terms of validating our equipment for hydrogen. We were also fortunate enough, it's always good when a client has a requirement that pushes the technology forward. So we were involved in a project in the US actually, where they had a large CO2 pipeline running at around 140 odd bar, something like that, that didn't have any way to inspect the pipeline. So they were looking at basically ways to isolate that pipeline. Now this is something we will take forward, you know, with the carbon capture projects here, but we're lucky that we have that sort of track record to fall back on. So, but just to sort of highlight, it's not a standard operation, and you know, this project was probably 2 years in the discussion and in the planning and in the testing before we actually got to the phase there. Various issues which a little technical I'll not focus on today, but yeah, there's challenges out there in terms of our specific part of isolating a CO2 pipeline. So we were able to do that, work with our client to provide that isolation eventually, which was great for us. And to be honest, as I say, as we've seen, this project started, I think, probably about 2015, because that pipeline was in existence. But you know, it's becoming more and more prevalent now in the last couple of years, our experience there. Just as we start to see more and more requirement, more and more clients asking us about CO2 or, you know, or hydrogen capabilities with our equipment. So, I mean, you know, where are stats positioned then? As I said, this, you know, I'm speaking specifically about a very small part of a large industry, but we like to think we're reasonably well positioned within our market to support hydrogen and CO2 as we move forward with the energy transition. However, I mean, it's a topic that's come up, you know, a word that's mentioned a few times this morning is investment. So we're no stranger to that as well. Ultimately, our CEO is a former accountant. He likes to see a reward for any investment in research and development work he does. As I say, we're lucky with those two projects that were funded or a live project. But I suppose, you know, in closing, what I'd like to say is, you know, I've seen sort of two sides of this. I've had a large operator come to us and say, look, these are the projects we're involved in. This is our roadmap. This is where we think we might utilize you, Stats, and this is the equipment we'd be looking for from you. And, you know, as I say, that's early days, but that's good to have that engagement. It gives us foresight in what we're doing in terms of spending and testing, ensuring all our equipment is valid for the future, it is going to be utilized. I've also seen the flip side of that, where we've had companies come and go, well, hi, can you send me your track record on hydrogen connectors? And I was like, well, that won't take very long, because there isn't any. Nobody's asked us to do that before. So, you know, that's kind of the lazier end, where, you know, as the supply chain, we want to help and be part of this transition and part of the future, but we really need to be engaged early on to ensure that we can upscale. You know, we talk about people and technology, but particularly people, to be able to upscale to support the transition and move our existing equipment into the new energies. I'm just gone red, so that's me out of time. So yeah, thanks very much, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. There's a few really good examples of how existing supply chain in the oil and gas sector can transition into the new energies sector. Final speaker now is Michael Love. He's head of skills policy at Opito, and he's going to talk a bit more about developing skills.
Thanks very much, Tom. Good morning, everyone. That's working, that's a good start. I hope you're all enjoying the conference so far, and thank you very much for taking the time today to come and listen to this session. My name's Michael Love. I'm Opito's head of skills policy, and I'm keen today to give you a bit of an understanding of what Opito does as an organisation. I know that might not be common knowledge to quite everyone in the room. Discuss some of the key projects aligned to the North Sea Transition Deal, which Jenny touched on earlier, that we're driving forward, And these projects really have presented a multitude of opportunities to innovate and align existing skills structures, as well as look at the intrinsic value of various qualifications, frameworks, and systems. My background is very much in energy industry training and competence development, specifically across the marine, oil and gas, and broader offshore renewables sectors. I've held roles covering quality assurance, program management, and energy transition, and you now find me in a policy-centric role leading our domestic and global engagement and stakeholder management strategy. So to start with, OPITO is the global not-for-profit skills and standards body for the energy industry. So up to 500,000 people are trained to OPITO standards every year, and more than 250 countries would be quite an achievement, 50 countries, through 250 accredited centres. We drive safety and competence improvements to benefit the industry. We're actually industry-owned, and we work with stakeholders across the board, so trade unions, operators, contractors, trade associations, governments, to offer a range of services and products to help meet international skills needs and support workforce development. Now, there are three key overarching principles that our business practices are anchored in, which you can see on screen. So stakeholder engagement, that really helps ensure fluid communication and the early identification of needs and wants. The creation of globally applicable standards, that's been our role for many years and will continue to be so. And workforce development itself, primarily in the form of accessible competence assessment and the rollout of global qualification programs. We do also do a lot of work in the STEM space. So this slide, I think, does quite a good job of breaking down the sequence of events that have led to where we are today. The North Sea Transition Deal, which Jenny touched on, was published in March 2021 and is approaching its third year anniversary. This transformational agreement between government and the UK oil and gas sector contained a variety of objectives across its 5 pillars. And in response to Pillar 5, OPITO published the Integrated People and Skills Strategy in May of 2022. So we're not at the 3-year anniversary point, but we are approaching the terrible 2s. This document was produced after a pretty extensive period, as you would imagine, of industry consultation, and contained a total of 18 strategic priorities, which have since in turn been broken into 5 corresponding action plans. We have aligning offshore energy standards as number 1, which was published first alongside the strategy itself in May 2022. And then meeting future skills demand, defining workforce skills, and improving skills data intelligence, which were then published in November of that same year. Now that does leave championing diversity and inclusion. That's yet to be published in formal action plan form, as it seeks to really recognise the work that's already underway in the industry. So initiatives that OE UK, for example, are leading, their D&I task force, their baseline reports and surveys, and a broader spectrum of work as well. So as we approach that anniversary of the publication of our strategy, a programme of planned content will be released over the coming weeks via OPITO's social media channels to better highlight progress made to date. By way of a short summary today, though, the work's progressing at pace and positively. As again Jenny alluded to, we've created career pathways showcasing innate transferability across the sector for oil and gas personnel in critical mass roles. We've undertaken a large piece of research work looking at the STEM landscape nationally and heat maps and cold spots. We've developed a digital vehicle which will be launched shortly to better showcase kind of graduate internship and work placement opportunities. We've developed a cross-sector integrated vocational qualifications framework, which has involved input from numerous other skills and awarding organisations. And we've also been creating case studies in conjunction with industry partners and innovation houses to showcase the benefit of things like VR simulation in a training environment. This work is iterative, organic, and will continue over the coming months and probably years as the industry itself progresses through this transition. And our focus permanently on this is making sure that the workforce ultimately derives ultimate value from what we're creating. Now, these figures on screen are based on a compilation of research studies published by the likes of Renewable UK, Hydrogen UK, Robert Gordon University, and ORE Catapult's Floating Offshore Wind Centre of Excellence. This graphic was contained within our people and skills strategy, so estimates will have changed slightly since it was put together, but the overarching message remains in that it's forecasted that the offshore energy sectors could support up to 350,000 jobs by 2050, which is an increase of around 196,000 on today. Now, these include skills required across all business areas, from engineering and fabrication to procurement and people management, leadership, new digital skills in automation, for example, and both onshore and offshore roles in terminals, fabrication facilities, and so on. Building on that data piece and the importance of LMI information, PITO, in partnership with an organization called Opergy, have launched something called the Energy Skills Intelligence Hub. Now, this tool supports the industry to answer key questions on its workforce and what its future people and skills needs might be, like what the size of our current workforce is at a high level by energy sector and by job family type, and what the future workforce requirements might be. There is also functionality to pick on specific sectors and see the expected change in the workforce makeup between now and 2030, which could be quite a powerful workforce planning tool. There's also the facility to focus job concentration by geographic area, which again could be useful for those involved in inward investment activities. So if that's of interest to anyone, the URL is in the public domain. I'm happy to provide it, and it's free to register and to use that data. Now, to ensure we have a flexible and mobile workforce that can service the full scope of future offshore projects, we need to increase recognition and acceptance of various standards and qualifications. There also needs to be a clear digital solution that can act as a central repository for all that certification data that gets pooled from various source systems, and one that provides information on career pathways and opportunities for those seeking direction or inspiration. That's what the Skills Passport seeks to do. It's innovation in its most fundamental sense, but it is still a highly complicated project. I think this slide is powerful, and it does well to remind us why we're striving for this solution in the first place. If we look at the various visions set out by both Scottish and UK governments, they're ambitious, and they reflect the criticality of driving forward net zero and climate conscious targets across the breadth of the energy industry and beyond. Now, we all know that renewable energy production must be enhanced, and this requires alterations to grid capacity and infrastructure, far too technical for a conversation on skills. But it will require that agile and flexible workforce. It also will require a balance of energy sources to help ensure our energy security, and that, from a PITO's perspective, is critical in directing workforce transition at the right pace so that we don't risk supply outweighing demand. It's our view that the skills, knowledge, and experience from the oil and gas sector will be the key to unlocking the UK's full capacity and full deployment of renewable energy generation, and standardisation and cross-recognition are paramount initiatives as part of that. There are great benefits to be gained here for the industry as a whole and the country, but when considering the workforce. And when you look at the projected movement within the sectors and out of the oil and gas sector, perhaps over the coming years, there need to be these established transition pathways in place ahead of time to cope with that traffic. So I've covered quite a lot of information quite quickly there, but hopefully that's been useful in explaining some of our work under the North Sea Transition Deal. Thank you for your time, and I'm looking forward to the panel.
Thanks, Michael. That's a really interesting look at skills development in relation to the transition. So, as Michael said, next stage of this session is panel discussion. So I'd like to invite the speakers up, and we'll take some questions. Okay, so thank you, everyone again. I want to kick off maybe just on a theme that Jenny, Chris, and Andy mentioned, which was one of investment, and talking about the need for, if you like, a defined pipeline of projects, some certainty on what projects are coming up and what technology is going to be required. But I guess, to what extent are we going to need to see a lot of external capital coming in here, and how do we think that is capable of being accessed?
I can
Yeah,
take that one.
do you want to
start? So we've done some early analysis on that one, Tom, that shows that we think out to 2030 there's about £200 billion worth of opportunity spend in offshore energy. So that's oil and gas, hydrogen, CCS and wind. But about half of that has been committed to. So that means there's £100 billion out there that we need to convince companies to come and spend here in the UK. So how do we do that? And some of those themes were touched on earlier in the session. We heard people talk about the need for predictability here. We need to make this an irresistible investment environment to get companies to come and spend their money here, which will unlock activity, which gives the supply chain confidence to invest in the new technology and the innovation and the people that we've all spoken about. So predictability is really important. A fair and a tax regime is really important to give companies the confidence to invest here, and also make sure that we anchor our supply chain here, so when they do unlock the activity, the supply chain is still here to deliver it.
Okay, thank you. Chris, did you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think, as you've just said, and Mitch said this morning, it is that long-term vision, both in terms of policy, but also in terms of individual companies. Having that long-term vision to actually stick to doing what they set out to do is going to be really important. The one thing that's going to be the enemy of it is quarterly capitalism. Because if we're only thinking about the next quarter, we're only taking the opportunities to maximize our revenue for the next quarter, then we're never going to reach the long-term vision of a transition. So it needs to have that long-term vision.
Okay. Thank you. Andy, have you got anything to add to that in terms of what stats?
Well, yeah, just from our perspective, and I kind of touched on it in my presentation, we're trying to do a bit ourselves in terms of testing and making sure we're ready from an equipment perspective, but without that visibility on what specifically we need and where we need to be and what we need to be able to provide. We're kind of making a little bit of a guess on that, and assumptions based on what we currently do. But then equally, we have live projects, which, it's whichever baby's kind of crying the loudest. So invariably R&D projects, to make sure we are aligned for that, they invariably they go to the back of the queue, for live projects. So yeah, investment's key, having that visibility coming down the line to, so we can take that to our board and go, look, this is what's going to be happening. This is the advantage of investing in this technology and ensuring we're in the right place and ahead of the competition, as it were. And so we're ready. So yeah, investment is key, and visibility, as I said.
Okay, thank you. I guess just picking up the comment you made about starting with one guy working out of a rucksack, do you think that's the supply chain can do that all itself, or do you think external support is required, and what kind of external support?
It's an interesting question. I don't think we couldn't do it all ourselves. If you want to just talk about us as a business, as I said, that investment has to be there. There's so much that we invest in R&D annually that we can do ourselves. But we were fortunate. I mentioned a couple of projects that did come to us externally from industry. Particularly the CO2 one was a live requirement, so that's great, because there was, it was a live project. There was funding there to execute that project, and it kind of worked hand in hand with a bit of development for us. But just for us to assign revenue effectively to just R&D, it can be difficult when you're trying to build asset for other projects.
Okay. And Jenny, just in terms of that coordination piece, is that an issue you're seeing of trying to coordinate, help the supply chain access external capital or external assistance?
I think when it comes down to public funding, yes.
Okay.
We found that a lot of our members didn't know there was public funding available. Historically, it's been quite difficult if you're in the oil and gas industry to access government funding in R&D. I had one member describe it as an oil and gas funding-free zone for a while. So we work really hard to explain the integration and the interrelatedness of offshore energy to policymakers. I spoke about it in mine, and I've heard other people talk about it as well, that it is integrated. It's an energy industry, and the supply chain is probably the best example of that. Yes, some of our operators are integrated energy operators, but the supply chain is genuinely sector agnostic. So trying to explain that you can develop a technology and innovation in oil and gas that will then benefit the energy transition is really important. So, yeah.
Okay. I mean, people do talk about clean tech as a new fintech in terms of where technology investment's going to go, which is all positive. I guess, Michael, in terms of investment in skills, are you seeing the same thing in terms of ability to access public sector investment?
I think, Tom, one of the key challenges, there are positives to this. One of the key challenges is the fact that skills across the UK is a devolved matter, which can create complexities in terms of disparate funding streams, as you mentioned there, disparate qualification levels. It can add additional confusion to what can already be quite a convoluted space to understand unless you're embedded day in, day out. We've seen great success from a PITO's perspective when it comes to launching qualifications, so longer term learning programs in England through boot camps. And local enterprise partnerships have been invaluable, and college consortiums have really supported that process, which is fantastic. But it's certainly not as straightforward as I think it could be, and that can have an impact and scare off innovation to a degree. We're fortunate, Apito is fortunate in Scotland that we are an SCQF credit rating body, so we can credit rate qualifications, they're vetted appropriately, and then colleges, whomever, is at liberty to draw down funding to deliver them. But how that interplays with off-qual, things like the adult education budget, is a bit of a minefield. So I think if we really want to streamline things across the board, there needs to be a better way of unifying these systems and looking across borders, which is something with the partners around the table under the North Sea Transition Deal we're trying to push forward.
Okay, really interesting, thank you. In terms of moving just into technology, specific types of technology, I guess, Chris, you talked a lot about AI and digitalization, and you see that as being the fundamental bit of technology development that's going to drive development. How do you think AI will impact the sector more generally, and what sort of development of AI, large language models, etc., have you seen so far?
So in terms of AI, used effectively, it's transformative. Used ineffectively, it's generally a catastrophe. So AI is only as good as the data that you train it with. It's only as good as the intelligent human that's designing the question and the hypothesis behind it. And it's only good as to the designed application. So you need to have a case for it. You can't just, sprinkle AI glitter on everything and hope that the Industry 4.0 will transform the energy transition for you. So you have to be mindful and careful about how you design the question. But AI is really transforming things where we have large, complex, diverse, real-time data streams. Because you can never get a human to sift through all of them. You could never get an optimizer to sift through all of them. So where you have very complex, multitude, diverse, different data sets all coming in real time, AI can be trained to make real-time decisions. And when it comes to going to the energy transition, where we're dealing with electrons and grids have to be reactive to electrons, that's where AI really makes a big difference. But seen some other really great examples of AI in, I guess, less highfalutin sort of applications. We use it for preventative maintenance. So rather than a tool coming offshore, and periodically you have a frequency that you take that O-ring out, throw it away and replace it. In terms of sustainability, that doesn't make any sense. So therefore you can begin to look at multiple data streams, weight on bit, temperature, all of these sorts of things to work out when that piece could be serviced or when it requires servicing. That's very, very useful. I've seen it used for coordinating vessel movements to platforms. So you don't just go, I want that tool brought out here, and you'd contract the service vessel to come out to your rig and then go back to Aberdeen. So that's really good in terms of sustainability. But totally different, I've also seen it in the subsurface for population of properties into reservoir models. So there are all sorts of different applications about it. But the only cautionary tale that I will say, it is transformative but you need to have the thinking, philosophical contemplation to design the question behind it.
Okay. And I guess that just comes on to the people, isn't it? And to what extent, Michael, are you seeing a lot of emphasis on training in AI data?
I think you only need to look at any news outlet for a matter of seconds now to see AI being touted in some shape or form as, you know, revolutionising a process. And, you know, I think the onset of that in the industry, as Chris said, is inevitable. The kind of approach that we're taking to AI is an opportunity to, as part of the broader attraction piece for people coming into the industry, is look at expanding the focus from previously quite STEM orientated, you know, people and that focus to include a more artistic aspect. From our view is that there will still be an enormous need for that creativity, that design, those qualities that are very human, if I can say that. And I think articulating that properly will mean that, you know, we do ourselves favours and we don't maybe have to work quite as hard in attracting the raw numbers through other channels that we might need to if people from more of that discipline can visualise themselves in a role within the industry. I'd like to use myself as an example of that. You know, my undergraduate many years ago degree was in English. So I used to joke that, you know, I was equipped to write a pretty good email. And I've somehow kind of fallen through a path in the energy industry just now and kind of ended up in this position. So I think AI absolutely has its place, but it's about how we message that to showcase opportunity for other avenues and other groups of people as well.
Okay. And just picking up on that theme of selling the industry to the next generation, D&I think some of you talked about a little bit, is obviously part of that, but I guess Jenny, how do you think we sell that to the next generation coming through? We talked a little bit before we started about, you know, the industry, you know, generally is quite old and quite male. How do we change that?
Wow. Old and male. Hopefully I'm bucking a trend there. Do you know something? I had a really interesting conversation, a couple of people during the networking break around how we talk about this industry. They were talking about when they first came in, it was really exciting to work in oil and gas. It was a glamorous industry. We had Armageddon, Bruce Willis, driller saving the world. Fast forward, 20 years, and now it doesn't feel that glamorous right now. It doesn't feel like it's an industry people want to come and join as a new graduate. And there may be some new grads, new entrants in the audience, I'm not sure, but how can we make this an appealing industry to talk about? And part of that is showing the evolution through the industry. Talked about, and Michael talked about it as well, mapping career pathways as well. But part of it is about making this a fun place to come and work. We've got one of the biggest challenges facing the world in front of us, and this industry is ideally placed to challenge that and to tackle it. And there will be people in the room who will be first movers in tackling climate change and in transforming the energy system. That is seriously exciting. So can we get that message out in new ways and in different ways? Can we get companies to get comfortable with talking about the really cool tech and really good stuff we're doing in innovative new ways? Can you partner with Netflix and do a documentary that talks about what you're doing? And I know people in the room are doing that. And I'd like to see more of that because I think it's an amazing place to work. And I would love the next generation to feel that enthusiastic about it as well.
Okay, thanks. And in terms of Michael bringing skills into that and training, have you got any thoughts?
Yeah, Jenny's touched on the career pathways aspect, and I think it's really important that there is a great amount of opportunity in the industry, but I still don't think we're as good as we could be at showcasing that. And what's compelling, I think, for younger generations is being able to say, okay, I can start from X position in X sector, and there's a route that I can follow to maybe finish my career, having fulfilled numerous things along the way in a completely different sector, but utilising same skills, experience, knowledge along the way. I think there needs to be a shift in how attraction is dealt with as a whole. Younger generation have different values and different interests to what we've seen historically. I think there's starting to be a shift between kind of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. Extrinsic is still very much there, But more and more so, people are looking at, does this organization that I might work for, do their values align with mine? How robust is their ESG framework? How flexible are they in terms of, remote or hybrid working? And I think and we are seeing great examples of that, being done in practice. But I think we'll struggle to get the numbers we need until that becomes more commonplace and that approach is adopted more widely within the confines of each specific organization.
Okay, thank you. And I guess just picking up on that theme of, the ability of people to change and develop their skills as the transition progresses, that obviously means workforce flexibility in general is going to be really, really important in ensuring that opportunities that the transition presents can be taken. How do you think we build in workforce flexibility into our skills and training regimes?
Yeah, so this is absolutely critical, Tom, to, one of the key drives that APITO has under the North Sea Transition Deal, which is that mobility piece and cross-recognition of skills and qualifications. We have, as the skills body for energy, historically an oil and gas centric organisation, we've got a responsibility to that workforce to make sure that pathways are in place and they can visualise a career for themselves. It's very difficult to talk about specific skills gaps, that might be coming from nascent technology areas because that's still emerging. We don't have all the details yet. So our focus is really looking at where do we see overlap. So offshore wind is an example. The targets set out are very ambitious. We're going to need people left, right and centre, probably at pretty much every stage of the project life cycle. But if you're talking specifically where oil and gas can plug in, there's that electrical and mechanical engineering side. From a hydrogen perspective, there's gas safety, process engineering, infrastructure repurposing, and then carbon capture, the pretty fundamental aspects of transport and storage. We see these skills being well developed in oil and gas to this day. That's where I think the skills passport has a big role to play in showcasing that to the workforce in an easily digestible and easily followable format so that they can plug in their own qualifications where they want to be themselves, and it can then signpost and take the guesswork out. And I think my plea is just that it's a buzzword. It was the buzzword at every conference last year, but it is collaboration. It is, especially between standards and skills bodies, to make sure that if you've gone through a 4-year apprenticeship, you've served your time in a specific sector, you're not then funneled into the ground floor in a new sector, having to start again.
Okay, thank you. I guess just picking up on that word, collaboration, which has maybe been the buzzword of the industry since the Wood Review. I guess it's the other aspect of collaboration is collaboration between the supply chain and operators in order to develop innovative solutions. I guess, Chris, do you have any thought about how that can best be achieved? And have you seen good examples of that?
So ourselves internally, we recognise that nobody has a monopoly on value bringing value to the energy transition. We don't bring value to the offshore. There are lots of people doing the offshore wind industry very, very well, so therefore, why not partner? And that's what we've done. We've done it through a sequence of partners. So, for instance, we've got a partnership with Panasonic to produce battery-grade lithium. We've got a partnership with CA and Vinci to produce solid oxide electrolyzers. Where the synergies exist and we can share value, that's where we really grow a lot faster together. So we've done it through those partnerships because we recognise that places where other people bring more value and more knowledge than we currently have. So as a corporation, we've done it. But in terms of collaboration, specifically in the UK, I think there's been a wider recognition of that, which is why we have the energy hubs being formed and why we have consortium being formed. So I work as part of the Net Zero Technology Centre based in Aberdeen, and that is a consortium of partners that recognise that if we all got our heads together in a room and we banged out some concepts and we made some models, we do much better than if we took it in isolation. And it's those consortiums which I think are really, really good, whether that be based around one of the government's super places or a hydrogen hub or whatever that may be. It's those partnerships that are really making the inroads into creating value for the energy transition.
Okay. And Andy, I guess from a supply chain perspective, what challenges are you having in that collaboration? How do you think that can work?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've seen some good examples, you know, working with other companies on large-scale projects where it works very well. You know, I mentioned the, the LTS Futures project that we've been involved with. That's a pretty good example of how we managed to get in to that project and be part of that early, so that, you know, we're involved in that and we're going to be part of that through to its conclusion. So I have seen good examples of it working as well, but I mean, again, it's just, use that C word again, but it's about collaboration. And, you know, we're, as I said in my presentation, we're quite a small part of a specific part, so we tend to come in, you know, a couple tiers down from your major kind of contractor, for example. So we're already collaborating with other companies in most projects that we do. We're very rarely taking anything on in isolation, pardon the pun. But yeah, it's certainly a challenge, you know. Being involved early enough, I think, is always the key for us.
And Jenny, I guess, what can be done at a more macro level to kind of encourage that collaboration in the industry? What's OE UK doing?
So I think we do collaborate well, and I think the first panel talked about it when we kind of went back through some of the issues and the crises that we've worked through as an industry. We are at our best when we work together. And if I think back to the last really big downturn we had when we formed the Efficiency Task Force, that was bringing supply chain and operator together to make our operations more efficient. And there were some really interesting projects about marginal gains, about improving your efficiency as you went through, and that was people working together. There was the hackathon idea where you bring multiple companies together in to try and brainstorm and problem solve. I was talking to a delegate over breakfast as well who was saying that's what they're going to do to move innovation forward. They're not going to have a fancy pants conference, sorry Alistair. They're going to have a meeting in a room where they lock executives in together and work out with a big wall, how do we fix this problem? That's how we do it. You get people together who are innovators, who can work together well, who have a history of working together well in the room to find the solution.
Thank you. Want to leave some time for questions, so if anyone's got a question, maybe just raise their hand. Yeah, just at the front here. The mic will come to you.
Well, I want to thank you all for what you have raised. Can you list those skills? I don't mean the interpersonal skills now, the digital skills that there are gaps there, so that people can know how they can start to prepare themselves. And is it possible that this kind of information can be online, so that prospective employees can start to build themselves? Because I know definitely employers cannot totally train everybody. And then possibly, are there a possibility of having this kind of skills for small startups, so that they can have to build on that, so that they can complement the bigger transitional ecosystem?
Michael, I think that's maybe one for you.
I think so. I think I got most of that. I struggled to hear some of it. I think there was a question around kind of the transparency of what skills might be required going forward, and how existing skills could be utilised. I think, for lack of me just waffling in front of everyone, I would really signpost towards the Energy Skills Intelligence Hub, which I touched on in my presentation. That uses directional data and strategic forecasting in conjunction with the UK's project pipeline to forecast and estimate what movement looks like, ebbs, flows in relation to what gets signed off when and how. So I think there's a great deal of information there that could potentially address a lot of the points that you're making. So I can certainly have a chat with you after this about making sure that you have the URL and can access that website. I think that could be helpful. I think there was a second point around kind of startups and scaling skills, and what's important and how that looks moving forward. I think simply we exist in a very digital world now. We hear a lot about initiatives like reverse mentoring, which can be quite useful for in terms of younger, certainly people that are more tech savvy than I am. Showcasing what potential there is there and how organic growth can be achieved through that. I think it really is leaning on some of these more digital aspects. Automation might well play a part of that, depending on what kind of startup you're engaged with. AI, as we've touched on, has a purpose, but I suppose it's making sure that that's done within the confines of or being aware of what your company's vision and purpose statement would be. I'm conscious that might not have been the clearest reply. Like I said, I'm sorry, I struggled to hear part of the question, but I'm more than happy to have a conversation after this.
Thanks. I think there was a question down here at the front. Yep.
Hi there, Emma Cuthbertson at Global E&C. So the discussion has already kind of touched upon the fact that the historic energy industry workforce demographic may not be best suited or best known for being an early adapter of change and technology innovation. So my question is there enough being done in our locality to attract a diverse pipeline of talent that will embrace change? And if not, where could we do more?
Jenny, do you want to take that?
Welcome to the industry, Emma. Great, thank you. Michael's touched on some of the projects that are in place to try and make sure we've got a future skills pipeline. Diversity of new entrants is a big challenge for us as an industry. It's a personal challenge for me as a mum of 3 girls. I want my girls to be able to get into this industry as well. That's about getting right into early years. That's about encouraging girls to take up engineering and STEM subjects. And Michael's talked a little bit about the work that APITO and other organisations are leading right across the UK, and I think that is so important. There are also company-led schemes. Shell does a Girls into Energy, for example, which really encourages girls to choose a slightly different path than perhaps they would have done previously. And I think those kind of schemes are super important. But it also comes back to all of us in the room. We've all got a responsibility to encourage diversity and inclusivity in this industry, even if it is little things like who are you sending to this conference? Who are you putting up to speak on panels? Is it going to be you? Or is it going to be somebody a bit more diverse? And I think that's a challenge I'd put out to everybody in the room and the whole industry. It's something I try and do, and it's something our organisation tries to do, and I'd like to see a little bit more of that as well.
Okay, Michael?
I think, so just really to build on Jenny's point around STEM, we're very active in that space, as we've said already. We undertook a piece of research last year to look at what the picture nationally in terms of STEM looked like. And it came back really positive, certainly in terms of secondary school level engagement. But a big shortfall is that primary school. So like you said, Jenny, kind of getting in there early. And for me, that's critical. That's formative years. That's before subjects are chosen. And, a path has begun. It's getting in and inspiring. And this is where I think it's linked to my earlier point around, I don't think we make opportunity and the excitement of that opportunity clear enough. And if we can couple that with getting in at the ground floor earlier, I think we'll be in a much stronger position.
Thank you. I don't know, Chris and Andy, did you have any additional thoughts?
I was just going to say, did anyone see Energy Voice yesterday about the piece about geoscience skills? The fact that 40% drop in geoscience attendance at undergraduate degree in the last 4 years. So, I'd like to say some platitudes that we're doing really well, but clearly the communication piece is not getting out there if that's what's happening to geoscience. And the energy transition doesn't happen without geoscientists. So we kind of really need to focus and try and be as positive as we possibly can, but we need to communicate differently to what we're doing, because what we're doing isn't working at the moment.
Okay. And Andy, any sort of experience from stats in relation to this?
Yeah, I think Jenny's right. There's a sort of industry obligation to try and ensure we're engaged with young people, but also at a company level, we have to attract, provide the right environment for people, and what we were talking about earlier in terms of, we probably don't do the best job of getting out, the interesting and exciting projects that we're involved in. There's some projects I've spoken about with friends from outside the industry, and they're, blown away and unbelievable the things that the industry is doing. So, it's probably on industry, and it's also on us as a business to make sure we're trying to get that out there and attracting new talent into the industry.
Okay, thanks. Has anyone else got any questions? Oh, so maybe the gentleman here, and then we'll come to the quickly.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Aaron from SLB. So It seems to me that here in the northeast of Scotland, there's this magical combination, or historically there's been this magical combination of innovation and entrepreneurship, and it's reflected in pretty much everybody up there on the panel. Do you think we're losing it?
Wow. Jenny, I suppose.
All I heard was, do you think you're losing it? Probably, yeah. I think we are at risk of losing it. And I think you're absolutely right. I think the northeast of Scotland, Scotland in general, has an amazing international reputation for being entrepreneurial. So we have to think about the business conditions that we're setting. Are we really supporting innovators, entrepreneurs to go out there, try something new? Are we frightened of failing? Are we giving people with radical ideas the support they need that's necessary? And I think we'd like to think we're doing that, but I think we're at risk of squandering a great heritage. So I think it's on a knife edge. Don't think we've lost it yet.
Okay. And from an entrepreneurial organisation, Stats Group, Andy, any thoughts on that?
No, just probably again to echo what Jenny said. You know, as I say, we've always like to think we're at the kind of forefront of what we do in our industry. But yeah, in the wider world, yeah, it's a good question. You know, are we still talk about attracting people, attracting investment? You know, as you said, Scotland's always had a really good global reputation rather for engineering. I think particularly historically. So yeah, it would be worrying to see that go, certainly.
Okay, there's a gentleman just on the right here, just halfway down.
Yeah, my name is Collins Onyebe, a Schlumberger postgraduate energy management student. Schlumberger's energy transition, like opportunity comes with change, and this change will bring weakness and threats. What are strategies in place to stay ahead in the emerging market?
Okay, I'm not sure. Chris?
Are you asking that question specifically about Schlumberger? Or SLB, sorry?
Yeah,
Let's say yes,
yes.
okay. Well, what are the strengths and weaknesses of Schlumberger without revealing anything? I think that we do have the strength of being quite innovative, and if we find that we're not innovative, we love acquiring companies that are agile startups that are innovative, and I think that's one way that we have grown in the past, growth through acquisition. So going back to Aaron's entrepreneurial question, if we do see something that's really, really showing a lot of promise, these are very tasty for bigger companies to acquire. So I think that has been one of our big strengths. One of our big strengths is the fact that we see the value in our existing people, and we see that if we need somebody in the hydrogen sector that knows how to control a gas in a high-pressure pipeline, or somebody that needs to store a gas, then we realise that the oil and gas skills that we've got are transferable. We realise that we've got really good project managers, really good engineering, the ability to handle high capex projects, the ability to tolerate a lot of uncertainty and risk and help quantify that, and the ability to work under quite high pressure timelines. And I think these are all really big advantages going through into the energy transition. What, I won't say holds us back, but what stops us pushing harder into the energy transition is the return on investment, and that will be the same for anyone in the energy transition. Like it or not, at the moment, the oil and gas sector funds the energy transition, and that's where the majority of our revenue still comes from oil and gas, and that funds all the innovation that we're doing in the energy transition space. So we need that piece, and we need that piece to help fund this piece and help this piece grow before we can kind of set it off on its own. So I hope that answers the question.
Thanks. I think we've maybe got time for one more. There's someone in the front row here.
Sorry, we already did a couple of questions from Global ENC, so if anybody else wants the mic or has a question, if anybody else had their hand up, they can go. But mine wasn't necessarily a question as such in sort of the response to the fact that this panel is all about innovation and skills, and we've talked about digital being a major adopter. Jenny, you mentioned hackathon. I wasn't sure if you were mentioning one in particular. I swear I don't work for them, so I'm not plugging them. But is everyone aware of the RGU hackathon? Is everyone aware? So when we talk about digital adoption, I just think that's a fantastic case study in our sector of a university and education place where companies like Global E&C can go to so basically in a really short nutshell, a bunch of companies go to the hackathon. RGU get all the universities around Scotland. Anybody that's interested in digital can come up to this event. They get locked in a room for 24 hours, and different companies give them a challenge, a digital challenge to take on. And these students literally come up with the most amazing solutions that we've actually adopted in our business. We have a blockchain technology that measures our carbon emissions because of these students, so we ended up hiring them to develop that even more. We have a mobilization app that allows all of our 400 mobilizations offshore. Peter will probably be interested. There's all their certifications on there and everything. This came from those RGU hacks. So I just more wanted to put that in the room in case people weren't already aware. In terms of the innovation, skills, and digital adoptions, there's an initiative there already that I think more and more companies should probably piggyback onto.
Thank you. And I guess that's probably one piece of the collaboration bit that we haven't talked about, which is we've got world-class universities in Scotland, and collaboration between industry and universities is going to be really important in the transition. Okay, gentlemen, just middle here, and then we'll maybe finish off.
Thank you. Tommy Buchan, Business Development Manager at RGU. So it's actually good that there's a lot of things going on and everyone's speaking for us already. But just thank you, by the way, for your comments and for coming. Appreciate it. I was going to ask, in terms of the energy transition journey, and as it relates to skills and what's required in the industry, how do you think, we as a university, how could we do more to work with yourselves in the industry to just enable that journey to move smoother, potentially? What could we do more in different ways? What do you think?
Okay, thank you. And maybe go to Michael and then Chris and Andy on that.
Absolutely. It's a really good question, and it was a big discussion point when we developed, in conjunction with colleges and kind of further education establishments, some of our energy transition qualifications that I alluded to earlier. You know, we're talking about, you know, introductions to carbon capture, to hydrogen. So still new territory to a lot of people. And one of the challenges that I understand, you know, universities and colleges are facing is almost that train the trainer aspect. It's getting lecturers, teachers, you know, those education providers up to speed so that they can then provide the service to, you know, to people who need it to go through those qualifications. Now, that's obviously a wider problem. I think there needs to be some kind of, whether it's voluntary or not is another matter, but you know, a cross-skilling or upskilling program, you know, specifically targeted at people in, you know, facilitating these more technical disciplines as to how their own skills, including things like soft skills, I don't want to understate the importance of those, map across, and how they can be better equipped to facilitate some of these modules, qualifications in new areas, because I think that, if it's not already, will become a blocker moving forward when we've got people trying to move at pace through this, and we don't have enough, you know, teaching staff that are embedded enough in the subject to speak to it with authority.
Thank you. And I guess just Andy and Chris, just a quick comment on what you think the university sector can do just to help your companies develop solutions that you know, innovative solutions.
To be honest, it's probably not my area of expertise to answer. I'd have to get our training and competency team up here to answer that. But yeah, I think we do a reasonable job working with universities, as I understand it, to relay what we're doing. The specific details of that, I'm afraid, is not part of my remit, so I'm not too sure. So probably Chris has a better input on that than me.
I came up from Heriot Watt, actually, yesterday. I was at INETZ Plus, which is their research facility. They've got £100 million to get this new centre to help boost the energy transition. And they brought in there's maybe like 70 people there, and half the people in the room are industry, half the people are academic. It's doing those platforms where you get everyone in the room and you actually set up a collaborative research project. And I find that that's really, really handy for cross-pollination. One thing that I found really useful, and I know a lot of people that I've worked with have found really useful, is for universities to release these massive online, these MOOCs, these massive online open contents. And if you want to get information and learning everywhere very, very quickly, that's a way of doing it. And I know lots of people that have attended various ones all around, and we're just begging for a hydrogen MOOC to be released at the moment. We kind of, I was about to say we kind of need a global pandemic so everyone's got time to study all these again, but we don't need a global pandemic. But those sorts of massive online learning is really, really handy.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that just maybe drawing to a close, before I'll ask Alistair to come up and round us off in a moment, but just one final question for you all. I guess if you had to choose one thing in the skills and the innovation space that the sector needs in order to be able to take advantage of the transition, what would that be? So maybe start with Jenny.
Predictability.
Predictability. Okay, Chris.
Oh, you nicked it. I was going to say predictability. Long-term vision.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll go with investment.
Investment and
open-mindedness. You know, we're going to need people, you know, from out with the conventional oil and gas and other energy industries, ex-military, for instance. So we need an open mind to get the skills that we need going forward.
Okay. Good, thank you. That's been really, really useful and very interesting. So, as I said, just ask Alistair to come up and round us off.
Technology and innovation, but also a real call to action on the talent pipeline, which I think will hone our minds going forward. I want to say thank you to our speakers, our panellists. We've heard today what the industry is doing to support future production, why that's important, not just for this sector, but the carbon footprint and energy needs of the UK at large. We've discussed change on the horizon. We've heard about the opportunities for investment in new areas like hydrogen and CCS, and of course the major prize in offshore wind. We've heard a bit about uncertainty, and I think there'll be more of that to come. But while the political headwinds may feel strong, this is a region with a major investment opportunity. And as one of our panelists told me earlier, it's important we don't talk ourselves out of that potential future, nor can we let the importance of this sector be lost in that political maelstrom. There's great work being done, tackling the energy transition challenge head on. The industry can absolutely be proud of that. What's also come out of our discussions today, we need to keep the supply chain here and healthy to ensure the success of the transition. We've heard a lot of excellent discussion around technology, the digital applications, penetrating the market that can shift the energy transition dial. I guess for me, it seems that the technology will come, but we need the skills and the people to service that. So the industry has to be open and put its best foot forward about what it has to offer the next generation. Every company has a role to play in the energy transition, maybe to build a little bit on a point that Jenny made earlier. Let's each ask ourselves what our individual role is, whether we're showcasing that, making a positive case to students, that next generation, about the vital role that they could be playing. We're going to be digging into that further during our workshop on the North Sea Talent Conundrum we're hosting shortly, but I think that call to action skill is a really pertinent point for us to close our sessions and head away with. So just lastly, I want to say a huge thank you to our headline sponsors, SLB, and our other partners, without whom this event would not be possible. Thank you to the terrific events team at DC Thompson, the PNG Live, and to our audience for being with us today. For those of you joining us for the Talent Conundrum workshop, please make your way into room 7, where you'll be happy to hear lunch. I'll be waiting for you. I'm told that the spaces have all been booked up for that now. And with that, please join me. One last round of applause for our panelists today. Thank you.